ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਚੇਂਜ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ T4A ਹੈਗਾ ਇੱਕ ਟੈਕਸ ਫਾਰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ that is being made mandatory again ਉੱਤੇ moratorium ਸੀਗਾ from the time of I think Prime Minister Harper, right? So we're only going to sign the deal when it makes sense for Canada. That's one thing. There's not going to be a single solution, right? I'm not here to say that we're going to fix the economy in a month. It's going to take a while. The company, the carrier now will have to submit a T4A slip directly to CRA. ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਰੀਅਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ that ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵਕਤ ਲੱਗਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਹ ਇੱਕਦਮ ਚੇਂਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਔਨ ਦ ਗਰਾਊਂਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਨੋਟਿਸ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ but he's making decisions that are good for the country long term. But I think there is a misunderstanding of what it means to be an employee and drive a truck and what it means to be an incorporated driver and drive a truck.
And ਇਹ ਜੋ crackdown ਤੁਸੀਂ federal government ਜੋ ਹੁਣ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ is this an immediate thing ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਜਲਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਜਲਦ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹਦੇ ਅਸਰ ਦੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ it's a long term process?
So with the US relationship, I think 85% of the trade that we have between the US and Canada is already not tariffed.
ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਪਰਟੀਕੂਲਰ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਫੈਮਿਲੀਅਰ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਂਡ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਡ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਵੈਸੇ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਅਲੱਗ-ਅਲੱਗ ਆਪਸ਼ਨਸ ਅਲੱਗ-ਅਲੱਗ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਅਪਣਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਟਰਾਂਸਪੋਰਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਹੈ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੂਸਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਇੰਪੈਕਟਡ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਟੈਰਿਫਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਡਿਊਟੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਲੋਕਲ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੱਡੇ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਉਹਦੇ ਸੋਲਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੀ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਐਂਡ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਜੋ ਲੇਟੈਸਟ ਕੁਝ ਡਿਸੀਜਨਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਸਿਸਾਗਾ ਮਾਲਟਨ ਤੋਂ MP ਇਕਵਿੰਦਰ ਗਹੀਰ ਜੁੜ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਇਕਵਿੰਦਰ ਜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ
ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਫॉर ਹੈਵਿੰਗ ਮੀ ਔਨ
ਸੋ ਇਕਵਿੰਦਰ ਜੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਅਗੇਨ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਪਰਸਨਲੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਡ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਂਡ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਕੁਝ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਇੰਡਸਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਐਨਫੋਰਸਮੈਂਟ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਡਰਾਈਵਰਸ ਦੀ ਟਰੀਟਮੈਂਟ ਬੈਟਰ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨ ਕਰ ਸਕੋ ਕੀ ਨਵੀਂ ਐਨਫੋਰਸਮੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ
ਜੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹੀ ਕਹੂੰਗਾ that we know that the South Asian community is very involved in the trucking industry. So in Ontario, in Canada, actually, 1 in 5 drivers are South Asian. In Ontario, I'm sure the numbers are even higher. So kafi Punjabi bhaichara hai trucking industry de vich. And so, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to this community. Because trucking to bina jehdi community hai carriers, drivers, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾ ਸਾਡੀ society function ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ. So I just want to say thank you to all of them. There have been changes that have been brought in. Changes to the law ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਉਹ explain ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ I think ਕਾਫੀ misconceptions ਨੇ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ changes ਅਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ first of all we have to recognize that this is a split responsibility ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਹਿੱਸੇ provincial ਦੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਹਿੱਸੇ federal government ਦੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ so essentially there's two different models ਦੋ models ਨੇ for a driver right one model is the employee model who company le as an employee kam kar sakde ne dusra model hega that they can incorporate set up a corporation and both models are different the rights responsibilities of both models are different and just to clarify that we've brought in some changes so I think sab to badi change hegi if we can dive right into it ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਚੇਂਜ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ T4A ਹੈਗਾ ਇੱਕ ਟੈਕਸ ਫਾਰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ that is being made mandatory again ਉੱਤੇ moratorium ਸੀਗਾ from the time of I think Prime Minister Harper ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ lifted it's being lifted now and essentially ਜਿਹੜਾ T4A ਹੈਗਾ outside a regular employer relationship if someone's being paid then the T4A can be submitted so for example if there's a carrier and the carrier has several incorporated drivers ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੋ payment ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ the company the carrier now will have to submit a T4A slip directly to CRA ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ verification ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਗਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਸ incorporated driver ਨੂੰ and then CRA can directly report on that so that's one change that's been brought in I think ਉਹਦਾ ਡਰ ਸੀਗਾ perhaps there's some level of tax fraud that takes place, right? So I think, tax fraud obviously is not okay according to Canadian law. So that change was brought in for that reason. I think dusri gal hegi unfortunately, when we look at trucking, it actually has the highest rates of issues that arise at the Labour Board.
Wage fraud भी बहुत बड़ा issue drivers ਲਈ. Wage fraud बहुत बड़ा.
Wage fraud is a big issue as well, exactly, right? And I've heard of like very sad examples actually. So we have transport committee, ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਥੇ Ottawa ਚ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ testify ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਵਕੀਲਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ drivers as well. And some drivers ਉਹ ਕਹਾਣੀ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਵੇਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, that we work BPR ਲੈਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਸਹਿ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ. Right? And that shouldn't happen. This is Canada, right? We have to maintain a certain level of standard. And so I think in line of that, I think dusri problem jo jidi bari charcha hundi hegi hai, oh misclassification of drivers. Truthfully, I don't know how often intentional misclassification happens. Misclassification basically is jadon ek driver on paper he's incorporated, but being treated like an employee basically, right? Because jadon ek employee hunda hega, then you come in at a set time, you leave at a set time, you can't say no to work, within obviously reasonable bounds. You work for one company, one carrier, but then you have access to worker disability and other benefits that employees are entitled to. It's easier to access the labor board when you're an employee a little bit. The other model is incorporated driver. Ude vich, you on paper, the model is supposed to be that you can say no to work. You can drive for several different carriers. You can choose your own hours. You can choose not to work, obviously. And the payment is to your to your corporation. The ude vich tusi deduction le sakde hege for expenses that come up during the time that you're driving, and so that's why they save a little bit of taxes, and I think that model, maybe that's why it's preferred. But the problem has been there's been a mixing and matching of these models. So on paper, drivers incorporated today, but in actuality they're being treated like employees, but they're not getting the benefits that perhaps an employee would get, like disability and compensation and the regular access to the labor board. But so I think odele ek education campaign launch kita jauga to just inform drivers bi thade rights responsibilities ki ne under each model.
Do you have a number ki kinne ke drivers misclassification de vich aa rahe ya, kinne lokan nu ye problem face karni pe rahi hai?
I don't think we have an actual number because the reporting there's underreporting in our community, and that's a lack.
Do you think this is a huge number?
I think I have a pretty big sample size. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਰਾਈਡਿੰਗ ਹੈ Mississauga Malton, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਟਰੱਕਿੰਗ ਭਾਈਚਾਰਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਬਾਤਚੀਤ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, I don't know how often drivers are misclassified intentionally. ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਿਨ ਬਤਾਏ you incorporate them, they receive payment for years. I don't think that's happening to a large degree, but I think there is a misunderstanding of what it means to be an employee and drive a truck, and what it means to be an incorporated driver and drive a truck. I think lots of things are going wrong, and so.
And ये जो crackdown ਤੁਸੀਂ federal government जो ਹੁਣ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, is this an immediate thing कि बहुत जल्दी तो जल्द ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹਦੇ ਅਸਰ ਦੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣਗੇ, ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ it's a long-term process?
So it's been obviously brought up in the budget itself. I think it was announced before the budget, so budget has to pass. I think we're seeing some immediate changes already in ESDC. Which administers some of these benefits that workers will receive, and I think crackdown is the wrong word to use. I think we're sort of enforcing existing laws that are actually meant for the betterment of drivers. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਹੀ ਚੰਗਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ, right? ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ that drivers get abused. Sorry, I don't know if I finished the example earlier of the driver ਜਿਹੜਾ PR ਤੇ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ, right? And I think sometimes, they'll drive as an employee until they have PR, and then immediately switch over into incorporation once they have regular status here. But ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਹਿਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ, and we hear stories of employers withholding wages, workers not being given sick days or sick pay. Right, so I think we also have to do better as an industry as well in the trucking space.
While we're talking, I have plenty of questions, but one question that is continuously, frequently coming up is about wage. Wage protection ਲਈ ਕੁਝ special ਅਲੱਗ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਏਗੀ?
So I think within the existing space, there's a lot of mechanisms, but ਉਹਦੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ, you know? So I think this is where the models are a little bit different, right? So ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ incorporated driver ਹੁੰਦਾ, it's corporation to corporation ਜਿਹੜੀ relationship ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, right? So it's a business relationship, right? Obviously, you can't abuse. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ abuse ਹੋਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ. But when you are an employee, and then it's an employer-employee relationship, ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ Canadian laws ਨੇ ਉਹ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ. So I think several drivers that I've met actually prefer the employee model because then they can access sick pay, workers' disability. If they're not getting paid, they can take that to the labor board. Ek process, like I understand there's a frustration.
Basic employee benefits hai, wo sare mil jange.
Oh, mil jange, exactly, yeah. I think I wanted to say, obviously, thank you to everyone involved in this space. There's challenges, but we're looking to surmount those challenges. I work closely with the CTOA as well, which is like a new organization that's been set up. I've also met individual drivers themselves as well. So he bought discussion काफी चर्चा होती है इस कल पे, and then we bring in policies.
Iqwinder, kal announcement hui navi pipeline di. A lot of changes are happening in Alberta, majorly Alberta and BC ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ. ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ West Coast ਹੈ, Ontario ਦਾ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਮੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ. But ਇੱਕ ਵੱਡਾ ਸਟੈਪ ਹੈ, ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਸਟੈਪ ਹੈ. ਐਂਡ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਲਾਈਮੇਟ ਚੇਂਜਸ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇਨਵੋਲਵ ਨੇ. ਹਾਊ ਇਜ਼ ਦ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਲੁਕਿੰਗ ਐਟ ਦੋਜ਼? ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਡੈਫੀਨੇਟਲੀ ਇੱਕ ਇਕੋਨੋਮਿਕਲ ਬੂਸਟ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੈ, ਪੈਸੇ ਦਾ ਬੂਸਟ ਹੈ, ਜੌਬ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਕਲਾਈਮੇਟ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ. ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੀ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਹੈ?
I think it's a fine line, right? That it's a balance that a nation has to achieve, and you're never going to have that perfect balance achieved, I think, ever. And so we have to straddle that. So on one hand, we know that we've had a rough couple of years. COVID ho gaya, the war in Ukraine, global inflation ho gaya, I think housing prices, the coffee increase ho gayi sigi. And so we've also felt strains, right? And so in that space, I think it's important to help our economy. Right? So ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਜਾ ਕੇ trade deals sign ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ in the hope that it improves our economy. We're also diversifying the economy as well away from the US, which it's going to take years. It's going to take decades, right? But Prime Minister Karni ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇੱਕ plan layout ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ, right? So we need to help the economy. And I think this memorandum of understanding, it doesn't actually plan out a route for the pipeline. It doesn't lay out the land acquisitions that are going to be needed. It's sort of an ek ishara dita gaya hai sarkar wallo that this is something that we'd like to see happen, right? Because global demand hai je hai us cheez da, and if we can supply it from Canada, we can actually do it in a less environmentally damaging way than other nations can supply oil, for example. On the other hand, we recognize global warming is an issue, right? I think, look, I'm a relatively young MP, so I'll be living in this world for God willing a while, and I'll have to deal with the consequences of the actions that we take as a society, right? And so will our kids. And so, especially under the Trudeau government, and I think under the Carney government as well, there is a climate strategy, right? Part of that is the carbon tax that's on businesses, which I hear a lot about as well. And so we're not completely abandoning our climate strategy. I think that's still a front and focus. But I think it's a recognition of the time that we're in.
But your own minister resigned yesterday on this note only about the climate. Stephen Guilbeault resigned. And basically it was all about the climate. So क्योंकि climate impact हो रहे हैं ना deals तो.
So look, I think there's definitely been a shift in government itself, and I'll be the first to admit that. There's been a shift in the party stance as well, and that happens from leader to leader. And so Stephen Guilbeault, who's a great public servant who served for many years, he was a climate activist. So one of the actually both he has a very hardened stance on that issue. And so I think for him, maybe the wiggle room wasn't there.
So is the current government going a little lenient on this?
Yeah, look, I think we're definitely shifting a little bit to the center. He sanu lokan to feedback dita gaya siga that we want to pursue all these social goals. We want to pursue environmental policy, but we also need to make sure that we have strength in our economy so that we can support our social benefits that we have here in Canada. And I think maybe for Guilbeault, Minister Guilbeault, that was too much of a shift, and that's why perhaps he's taking a back seat.
And now that the budget is announced and probably will be finally passed and come into action in a couple of weeks, How does this change the economy? How the new partnerships change the economy and US relation? Are we seeing any green light there?
So I think on the US relationship, so with the US relationship, I think 85% of the trade that we have between the US and Canada is already not tariffed, right? And so only 15% faces tariffs, right? And so we have a better sort of deal, a better current climate with the U.S. than several countries have with a trade deal, right? So we're not going to negotiate a trade deal to put ourselves in a worse position that we're already in, just to be able to say, "Kisi logon kaisa dege dekho asi trade deal negotiate karta hai." So if no deal is better than whatever deal is being negotiated, then we're not going to sign the deal, right? So we're only going to sign the deal when it makes sense for Canada. That's one thing. I think Prime Minister Carney ne bhi hi gal kehti hai that perhaps in the last few decades we've grown reliant on the U.S. I think that's very obvious. It's a big economy. He wants to diversify that, which is something that we should have done a very long time ago. But we only realize this obviously when ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਔਖਾ ਵਕਤ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਦੋਂ ਹੀ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਦ ਸਰਕਾਰ realize ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ that we need to sell to different markets, right? And in that vein, they've signed trade deals with countries across the globe, including a recent MOU with the UAE for, I think it was $70 billion potential investment within Canada as well, which is the biggest agreement of that sort.
For this government at least.
For this government at least, right? And I think potentially in Canadian history actually. And so I think, but ek gal ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ realize ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ that ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵਕਤ ਲੱਗਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ. ਇਹ ਇੱਕਦਮ change ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ on the ground ਨਹੀਂ notice ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ, but he's making decisions that are good for the country long term. Yeah.
But that's the thing. People want some short-term changes because ਇਸ time ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ problem ਆ ਗਈ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ. Economically ਇੰਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ impacted ਨੇ ਲੋਕੀ. Debt is so high. Mortgage rates are so high. ਹਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ problem ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. Real estate is so slow. Trucking ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ problems ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ. So immediate short-term action ਕੋਈ ਇਸ time ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ?
So there's a lot of investment in the budget itself, right? The budget is investing roughly $80 billion as well. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ there's an $80 billion investment in the military alone over 5 years, right? An increase in investment, right? So there is $13 billion in the housing plan that's being invested. There are changes being brought in for businesses. So one I'll talk about, a little bit technical. It's called the productivity super deduction, right? So when a business buys a factory lende hegi ya equipment lende hegi ya, their accountants will know this, but odi depreciation hundi hegi ya. Over X number of years, 5 years, 10 years, है ना? ਜਦੋਂ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੀ depreciation ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, they can claim that against their taxes. ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ taxes ਬਚਦੇ ਨੇ ਹਰੇਕ ਸਾਲ ਥੋੜੇ right? ਕਿਉਂਕਿ depreciation ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ equipment ਦੀ, ਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ, ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗਾਂ ਦੀ. So with this deduction, if a business buys a factory or they buy equipment, they'll immediately be able to depreciate it, the entire value of that against their taxes.
Okay.
So like immediate boost in tax savings. And so that's supposed to encourage, that is going to encourage investment within capital infrastructure. And so these changes are being brought in, and hopefully this will help spur the economy. There's not going to be a single solution, right? I'm not here to say that, we're going to fix the economy in a month. It's going to take a while. But I look at someone like Mark Carney, and I'm not saying this because he's my boss, but he's led 2 different central banks. So, if I feel like I can trust this person with the economy, right? Yeah.
I really hope what you all are feeling, we all feel the same, and we are very hopeful that government jald to jald ho zyada decisions le, kyunki the things that the Canadians are facing right now is not something that we want to. And we really want this to end very soon and Canada to flourish as soon as possible.
Agreed.
So thank you so much, Iqwinder. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.